What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you my DLC review for Doom the Dark Ages Revelations, the latest expansion for that title. But before we dive into that fully, a few things I need to report. For starters, while I did not receive a review key for this DLC specifically, I did receive the premium edition when they gave out review keys for this game to begin with, when it released in 2025, and that premium edition came with the DLC, so that is how I'm bringing you this review, just so you are aware. And secondly, probably need to address the elephant in the room at some point, and that is the fact that Xbox laid off a bunch of people from all sorts of studios, but in particular, id Software is reported to have lost like half of their staff, which happened about 2 days before the release of this DLC. This video is pretty much just going to be focused on the content and what is here to experience, etc., so people will hopefully at least know what they are buying if they choose to pick it up. I sincerely hope all the people who are now looking for work manage to come out of this okay, as that is quite the upset in their lives, I am sure, but otherwise, let's talk about the DLC here. Now, as with basically every DLC, this also came with an update to the base game. The base game update was not that crazy. Most of it was just adding in the settings for the new DLC. However, they did make some adjustments and changes to a few of the weapons. It looks like one of the melee weapons, the Dread Mace, seemingly got the most changes, with them changing how much damage it deals, the speed of its executions, and even how much charge you get from melee pickups there, but also nothing too drastic. At the same time, the other changes to weapons were mostly just fixes for what seemed to be relatively fringe cases in certain situations, and all the other changes were changes to enemy AI and the usual range of fixes and the like. Now, the interesting part is, of course, the DLC, so let's go ahead and talk about that actually. So, Revelations takes place after the main campaign. You start this from the main menu, and as such, it continues the story first and foremost, but I really do mean first, as there's a great bit of content after you finish the story. The sort of main campaign, if you will, is, I would say, depending on your difficulty, anywhere from like 7 to 10 hours of content, give or take. They said in a preview they were shooting for 10 to 12, so that roughly makes sense to me, I would say. I imagine if you're on the highest difficulty it would take longer, etc. But once you're done with that campaign is where a lot of the extra progression actually starts. But before we get into that, what is this campaign about? Well, basically it is about, I would say, bridging the gap between this game, which is ultimately a prequel, and of course the games later in the series, like Doom 2016 and Eternal, of course. It actually spends a lot of time exploring the Doomslayer's past, how he came to be, his regrets, etc. And while I'm not going to spoil all of that, I would say if you're familiar with any of the Doom lore, none of it should really be too much of a surprise to you. But still, it digs into it. It was fun to see a lot of that stuff characterized. If you're wondering if Daisy is in there, yes, kind of. But how, of course, did this happen? Well, after the events of the main campaign of Dark Ages, you are basically lured into what amounts to a trap by the Council of Hell, who ultimately use this ambush, more or less, to trap you in Purgatory, where you are forced to come to terms with yourselves in order to actually get out. That being, you are meant to cleanse your soul in order to escape this place, which is naturally going to be done by ripping and tearing through everything in your path, except for exactly one thing, which is actually an entity known as the Architect, who deigns to help you here, seemingly trying to escape this purgatory as well. More than that, I will let people discover for themselves, but I will say there's a lot there, especially if you pick up and read the Codex pages. It was a relatively interesting story overall. But let's talk about the rest of it. So I mentioned that basically most of this DLC, I would say, really comes after this campaign happens, and that is because you unlock a bunch of stuff when that happens, namely the ability to replay all of the missions as part of this DLC, which I'll talk about the structure of in just a second, but that is going to allow you to take on some extra challenges and things via the Master Key. As you go through the campaign, you assemble the Master Key, and this gives you access to all sorts of stuff that you did not have access to previously, like areas and challenges in the levels you will now be replaying. These challenges are then going to let you take on the Uber boss, Once you have all of the pieces of the astral key gives you access to that boss. When you beat the boss, you then get access to the master arenas. Once you beat the master arenas, you unlock a bunch of new stuff for the Repertorium. The Repertorium being a sort of endless arena mode accessed from the main menu. So as you can see, quite a bit of content just there, but if that wasn't enough for you, once you get to the end game, you can also replay some like classic levels for a bit of old school feel, if you will. As you do that is to say finish those levels, you'll pick up some pieces to assemble a new weapon, which I thought was pretty cool. But what is interesting is this almost sort of like Metroidvania-esque approach they took to the structure of this DLC, with the main purgatory area being like a sort of hub level that you will explore and find secrets in, and then access the main levels of the DLC through. Now it is through those levels you'll access things like, for instance, the classic levels that I just mentioned, but also the extra challenges, and that's where you'll get the rewards to go get the Uber boss guy, which is accessed through purgatory, etc. So it's like a hub and level system, similar to what you see in stuff like, say, Hexen Beyond Heretic, and plenty of other games, I'm sure. But as you progress through here, you're going to get the progression in the form of a few different items, which will allow you to access different areas you could not have previously, and then while you do that and solve some puzzles, you'll naturally find secrets and the like. Speaking of secrets, the DLC does not reveal them on your map until you have found them, in theory making them a bit more secret, as you would probably expect. None of them are like super crazy hard to find, but you do actually have to put in a little more work now. Now, before we talk progression, I did want to throw in here somewhere that it was mentioned that this DLC was a bit of a step up in difficulty from the base game, and I can definitely agree with that overall. They threw a lot more enemies at you. The enemies that they do throw at you that are from the base game have new variants now, like some of them will explode or do all sorts of crazy stuff, leave pools for you to avoid, leave a trail behind them. Even more of them will do that stealth thing from the base game that I did not appreciate. So in general, not only are you fighting more enemies and a couple of new and returning ones at that, they also can potentially come in variants that have extra effects you have to deal with, and all of that is a lot to handle all at once, and that's before you get to the new weapon swapping situation with the spear and the shield. So yeah, can confirm it is a little bit harder than the base game, to say the least. But let's talk about one of the main features here, which is the chain spear. The chain spear is more or less what it sounds like, a spear that is also going to allow you to do things like grapple and hook on to enemies, move around them using the directional keys. You can get a bit of movement there, and while that is all well and good, I will lead with this. Having to switch between it and the shield when you get the shield back is not something that felt great to me. I'm not sure if continuing to play this will make it feel any better, but while the DLC definitely focuses more on the spear, you actually do need to switch to and use the shield pretty regularly, and it's pretty obvious the game expects you to swap back and forth, and trying to swap back and forth while also juggling all of the other new stuff is just something that honestly I was struggling with a little bit. I'm sure other people will do a much better job of that than I did, but the issue really is that the chain spear provides you a lot of movement that the shield does not, where the shield is a little more convenient at range for doing things like breaking superheated armor and whatnot, and juggling all of that is just something I, again, personally was struggling with. And keep in mind, you do lose the shield temporarily at the beginning of this DLC, but you will get it back. Speaking more specifically about the chain spear, however, one thing I really enjoyed about it is honestly just the ability to get up and over enemies. There are a lot of enemies that, honestly, sometimes it's just easier to go above them than it is to try to go around or even focus on the parry mechanics. Now, if you're wondering how the parry works, in the case of the Hell Surge attacks, this is basically the same thing. So your parry with the chain spear is actually a slash attack, which will deal damage to enemies in melee. And while you can throw the chain spear, it doesn't break the superheated armor. It's rather that the parry does that. Now, luckily, you can actually get this spear upgraded, and it comes with quite a few different upgrades, as well as new abilities to give yourself, like the ability to slam down on the ground once you're up in the air, but all of those work off of empowerment. As you perfectly dodge attacks like Hell Surges, because another thing about the chain spear is that because you can't block, what you do instead is do perfect dodges, things like that, and then a couple of upgrades as well will give you the ability to build empowerment, which you can then spend on activating the more powerful powerful spear abilities, which was nice to go with all the new enemy variants and everything. But that is the primary new thing for this DLC. The rest of it is pretty much from the base game, so don't expect like a complete overhaul of the combat here. And while the spear itself does give you a different, I would say, angle of attack, quite literally, in the sense that you have a lot more movement with it, you do frequently need to switch to the shield for both things like traversal, etc., in order to solve some of the puzzles, that kind of thing. So it's just not like a dramatic reimagining or anything. Now, you upgrade this stuff much the way you would upgrade it in the base game. You're going to be picking up currency, platinum, and then blood iron later, and you're going to use that to upgrade your spear, which is the primary bit of progression. You get a reset to your suit in this DLC as well, so you'll be able to upgrade things with some leader shards from particularly difficult encounters, at least as far as the main campaign goes. But once that's done and you hit the in-game stuff, then you start picking up different versions of the same thing, but different in the way that you can't unlock these beforehand, and the in-game thus allows you to get your final upgrades for both your new suit as well as the chain spear itself, which is of course where the best of the best stuff is going to come from before you start hitting into the in-game proper with like the bosses and master arenas. Unsurprisingly, the in-game currencies are pretty much all of the areas of the levels you could not get into previously, so there is a sort of natural progression to the entire thing. But I think that is, I would say, the biggest gist of the DLC itself, so if I were to offer a few opinions here, I've got to say, while the concept of the spear is neat, I just don't love it personally, and it's not even necessarily the spear, it's the switching back and forth between the spear and the shield saw that you need to do in order to do things like solve puzzles, etc., as each of them has their own sort of interactable thing, and puzzles often see you switching between those, and it's easy to get lost in like which one I have out when. And then the spear itself also comes with extra movement via like the dash and everything, and so you need to get comfortable constantly switching back and forth, and again, just on top of all of the other new mechanics you're trying to juggle at once. For me, it didn't feel great. I'm sure plenty of other people will be better at it than I was, though. Probably should also throw in here, I don't know if this was a bug or intentional, but the keybinds for the spear at the same time are like not ready when you start the game and play it. You have to go in and manually assign the spear keybinds, otherwise they're just completely unassigned, and I'm not sure if they just like didn't want to interfere with the keybinds people may have already had, and that was intentional, or if that was just like a bug of some sort, I'm not sure. Otherwise, though, I was really into the story of this DLC. I liked seeing a lot of that, the cinematics. I enjoy the progression of it, like, moving through the campaign and the in-game into the boss and all that. I also enjoy the new enemy variants themselves. I think if there wasn't an extra, like, gigantic weapon mechanic to throw in there and get to grips with, I would have enjoyed those just on their own. And I also enjoyed the levels as well, the sort of back and forth and going in, finding secrets which are a little harder to find, and then new challenges from the retread after the campaign. I enjoyed that exploration. So for me at least, there was a lot to enjoy here, but I will just straight up say that the main conceit of the DLC, which hinges around like this chain spear and all of the mechanics surrounding it, just kind of didn't land for me personally, but I mostly enjoyed it otherwise. So as a conclusion goes, I would basically say that, like pretty much all DLC, it really depends on how much you like the base game. The DLC itself, standalone, is $20. If you had the premium edition, you should already have it. Though I will say, bizarrely, at least on Steam, it doesn't look like the premium edition is on sale for the summer sale, whereas the base game of Doom the Dark Ages, for the day this is going live anyway, is, and then you could buy that and the DLC for relatively cheap, so just kind of an oddity, I suppose. But regardless, if you're looking at buying this, I would really just take a look at people playing with the spear and see if that feels like something you would enjoy, because otherwise it's a fun expansion of the base game, and in that sense, if you enjoyed the base game, you'll enjoy this. But I do think that's just about everything I've got to say on this particular DLC, so if you enjoyed the video, by all means, like, comment, subscribe, all the YouTube jazz. Let me know how you feel about it, especially if you've played it, down in the comment section below. But regardless, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.